Well, hello to Annemie. I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. It's a fun thing that the wonderful, magical internet allows us to get together and chat all the way across the world.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here today because I just think that you bring so much value to the photography community. I've watched you from afar for a while. So it's so nice to be able to connect with you today and introduce you to my audience if they haven't already discovered you. I might get you
Ah,
just to give a little quick insight into how it is that you've landed in this beautiful industry that is photography.
oh gosh, yeah, that story goes back not quite as far as I think your story goes, but I didn't grow up in a photographic family, but I got, was interested in photography, was an amateur photographer for years, and then in my early 30s, my younger son was born, and my I was in a master's program studying nursing of all things. Like I was on a completely different career track and just was not happy with what I was sort of coming to understand was going to be my role and my career. But I was having this crisis, I mean, which is laughable in retrospect, of like, I'm so old, I can't possibly switch careers. And I didn't really have a clear sense of what I wanted to do in lieu of that. And then somebody said at some point, well, you're great. You're a great photographer. You should give a go to that. And I was like, what? That's not a career. And here we are 14 years later, and it's very much been my career. So I started my business in 2010 and I've done a bunch of different things over the years, but for the past several years have photographed exclusively families. And yeah, got into the education space about 5 years ago, and just love chatting specifically about kind of the business side of running a creative business. And I feel like that's kind of my superpower.
I feel like you and I are very akin to this. I mean, I call this the business of personal brand photography
Yeah, yeah.
podcast because I think that as creatives, it's so easy to get really obsessed with the craft of photography. And of course, that's natural, I think, early on in the career, of course. But I think that what isn't taught a lot of the time is the business aspect. I mean, at what stage did you find in your career that you kind of maybe made that shift where you started like really focusing at business, or was it already inherently in you when you first started?
So when I first started, one of the very first classes that I took was, of course, a photography course, because even though I felt pretty confident in my skills as a photographer, I wanted to make sure that I was going to be legit, right, as a business owner. If I was
Mhm.
going to run a business, I needed to make sure I knew every single inch of like the actual craft piece of it. And so I was taking this course, and the instructor at some point toward the end of the course, was like, your work is really good. This is going to be great. And I was like, well, good, because I'm really hoping to make this a career shift. And he said, the best advice I can give you is to put as much effort and focus on the business side of your business as you do on the art, because he was an older gentleman, and he was like, I have seen a lot of people come who are very talented artists who can't get the business side of things together, and that it's a stopping point. Even if their work stands on its own, ultimately you have to run a business. And I really took him at his word. I was so at that point invested in this idea of making photography a career. And so immediately after that, I signed up for a business course and was just like, I'll just, do whatever you tell me to do. And it has not been without a lot of big missteps. But part of the reason that I'm so passionate about teaching the business side of it is exactly what you said. I see so many people who are fantastic at their craft and who are just floundering. They're in the Facebook forum talking about how like nobody will hire them for almost no money. And I'm like, you've got this all backwards, and it's such a waste. It's such a waste of talent. So yeah, I'm like you, I am out here crusading for people to do better in their businesses.
You are so lucky that you got that mentorship
I
so
know.
early on. I mean, I look back at the early stages and I was definitely very lucky because my dad is a natural salesman and is a natural marketer. And so I learnt those skills. However, my dad and mum will both tell you that they were just good at the doing. Like, if you've ever, have
Mm-hmm.
you ever heard of like worked with Tony Robbins on any kind of,
I know
have
who
you?
he is, and I've
Yeah, okay.
listened to some of his stuff, but I've never like taken any of his courses or
Yeah,
anything.
so he
Yeah.
talks about like there's people who are business owners and entrepreneurs, and then there's people who are just doers. And my parents will actively both say, we were just doers, we just did the thing. And I think that
Hmm.
that's the hard thing for a lot of people that are transitioning into photography outside of having worked for somebody else is that they still sort of think in that per hour trade time for
Right.
money. So they suddenly go, "Oh, I'm working for $250 for 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon. Great. You know, that's
Right.
$125 an hour." And then it's like, "Hang on a second."
Assuming the rest of your business runs itself.
Yeah, yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah,
Like the photography part of it is probably what 10% of our time really, like when you think about it. If
maybe.
even,
Right.
yeah, if even
Yeah.
if you're lucky. So I really love the fact that you went looking for that kind of mentorship and you went and looked for that right training from the get-go. How do you think that that sort of like having that business acumen early on sort of set you apart maybe from other people? Did you sort of like pace yourself against any of your peers as you were coming up in those early days of your business?
Um, yeah, I mean, of course, like, yes, there's so much comparisonitis, right? And especially in those early years, you're just looking around and you're like, I'm a total imposter and I, whatever. For me, it really was this sense of do or die. Like, if I don't figure out how to, I was married at the time and our income was very much like split, split income. I was equally responsible to my husband and I were equally responsible for our household income. There was not a lot of extra at that point in time. And so there was no like, well, I'll just, quit my job and then give this a go. Like I had to build my business while I was still working full time. And then when it came time to potentially start to like reduce my hours at the hospital and go more full time, I was lucky because nursing allowed me to do that. I could sort of step down the amount that I was working as I built up my photography business. But at some point in every person's story, if they are moving from from working in a job to running their own business, there is this leap of faith that has to happen. And that was really scary for me. And I was just like, even if I'm uncomfortable with charging what I've run my numbers, I see the number that I need to charge. That makes me want to vomit a little bit. But the thing that makes me want to vomit more is the idea of not being able to do this. Because once I got that idea in my head, then it was like game over. That was all I wanted to do. So yeah, I just kind of put my ego aside and put all that self doubt or imposter syndrome or whatever you want to call it. And I like shoved it down and said, you have to be quiet. I'm trying to run a business here. And that, it worked out.
Thank God. I definitely feel
Yeah.
you with that because I had a similar thing. I like to think of weddings was my day job because I kind of walked into a fully functional business. And
Yeah,
then I
sure.
had to transition when I moved into state to do portraits and start a new thing. So there was that definite leap off point as well, similar to you, where I had to suddenly start saying no to weddings because they were 3 years apart. They were like a noose or an
Right.
anchor, right? And then you've got to go, okay, they feel very secure, but now I've got to
Mhm.
jump. And I so resonate with you saying that you have to just push that. Like I didn't have the time either, or as a single mom, I just didn't have the bandwidth or the space, or I don't want to say that to be able to indulge in it because it's definitely very crippling and very real. But
Yeah.
I wasn't allowed to let myself swim more than a couple of days in the I'm not good enough pool. I just had to go, you're
Right.
there. You're a big fat monster, but I'm not going to listen to you tonight. I'm
Right.
just going to go and
Right,
do.
right. There's a little bit of it, like that feels so scary, but when you're on the other side of it and you look back, and certainly, this is one of those, it's easier to encourage someone else than to try and do it yourself. But in looking back and looking at it, it's like, what's the real danger there? What is the worst that could happen if you give it a real go and you do that in a way that is planned, thought out, you're protecting yourself. I mean, I'm always the first to say, like, don't go quitting your day job to jump in if you have no, if there's no cushion. Like, I'm not interested in having somebody be in that situation. But if you're committed to something and you put that goal as your kind of guiding light and you follow it, the worst that could happen is that it doesn't work exactly the way you want it to and you have to go back and get a different job for a bit of time. But it's not a binary thing. It's not like success or failure are your two options, right? So I think that allowing yourself to just try things and experiment and continue to move forward with this idea that like sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable, you get there eventually. And enough, if you stick to it long enough, you will achieve those goals. goals.
I know there's been different times in my career, and I definitely see this, and I'm sure you see this with a lot of these students where you can live in that sort of like sense of paralysis of, worried about this and that. And it's as soon as I've found always, and I'm sure you've seen this, and I've seen it for other people too, that the second that you sort of take that big leap and you step into that unknown, it's not always the thing that you think that's going to happen that happens, right? But there's
Right.
you're open to so many more opportunities, and I think that that's I don't know, for me, like there's a sort of like a fluidity that can happen when you sort of just let go a little bit of what you think the outcome should be. And I know that we're
Mhm.
sort of like moving into a bit of a woo woo space here when I'm talking about systems and processes and things, but I believe in that. I believe that you need to let go of something in order to create space for another, and I know
Yeah,
that you sort of have a very similar belief system to that.
I do.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to bring you on today because I know that you are a big, passionate advocate for having alignment in your business. And so I wanted to open up a discussion today to just really talk about what that means for you and what sort of direction. First up, I'd like to say, is there a point that you felt misaligned in your own business that sort of brought you to this place?
Oh gosh, I've felt misaligned in my business many times over the years, and I don't know that I used that word because for a long time I felt like that word was, you say like we're venturing into woo territory. I tend not to be a particularly woo person, not because I don't believe in a lot of that in general, but I'm always like, come on, give me the practical, tactical steps that I need to follow. Give me a checklist, like any day, I'll take a checklist, and I want something to just be like, here's what you need to do and here's why. And every time that somebody said something about, oh, you need to this like your business is out of alignment, I just felt like they were saying that as almost it was like an easy way out, right? You could just sort of say like, oh, it's out of alignment, and then that didn't mean anything. But over the years, as I sort of learned by feeling my way forward in a lot of respects in my business, in so many parts of life, you can sort of turn around, and they say hindsight's 2020. Like you can look at something with the benefit of experience and say, oh, I see how this all worked out. Later in my career, I started to notice these things where in my business and in other people's businesses, if those things were off, if they were out of alignment, that was when it started to cause problems. And so I started to see that alignment didn't need to be this kind of vague sense of just a word that people threw around. It could actually work as literally as like the alignment of, and I always use, if you put the top on a bottle of like a water bottle, if you can feel that that top isn't going on quite right, if it's out of alignment, if the threads aren't lining up properly, you're not going to take that water bottle and put it upside down in your gym bag, right? Like you're not
Mm,
going to trust the bottle to hold water, which is what it's supposed to do. And I think the same is true in our businesses. If something is out of alignment, we can feel it. We are like, this doesn't feel right, doesn't feel good. But potentially more importantly, our clients or our potential clients can also feel that. They can sense it. They come to your website and like what they're seeing and what they're reading doesn't quite match up. Or they go to your website and they see one thing and then they get on the phone with you and it doesn't quite sound right. Or maybe just your tone when you're talking about a particular offer, you don't sound confident. Maybe it's about your pricing. Maybe it's about what the terms of the process are, whatever. They can sense that, and it gives them this sense of like, I'm going to keep looking. Or,
yeah.
they'll say to you like, that's more than we were expecting. And you're like, but my prices are on my website. And so I think when I hear photographers, and now since I've been in the education space for a period of time, 90% of the time when someone's talking about what's not working in their business, they'll point to, I'm not getting enough inquiries, or I'm not booking enough clients, or I'm not making enough money. And then I turn and, if I'm doing either one-on-one work with them or I'm sort of deep diving on their website or whatever, 9 times out of 10, it's not that their prices are too high or their work isn't good enough. It's that something doesn't quite fit. And so I sort of created this, I call them the 5 Ps because I like to use alliteration so that things stick in people's heads. I came up with these 5 Ps of areas that need to be in alignment in order for your business to sort of feel trustworthy to you and to your clients.
I love having a framework around things too. But I also love that you've identified that disconnect because I find this a lot with photographers' pages that I might go researching on or the students that I work with too, that I can tell that there's sort of like a copy and paste formula that they might have gone to
Right.
one photographer for one product. And I can go, I can see that you've probably directly like just adopted that and you haven't made it your own. It
Mhm.
doesn't, there's a sort of a feeling there. There's a disconnect that I can feel that you don't have a relationship to this product here or that what you're offering because it sounds so different to what you're doing on another page of your website. And so I
Right.
find that I see a lot. So, how do you then go with your 5 Ps around helping people to sort of like identify where it is that there might be this disconnect that's happening for them in the alignment of how they're feeling about their business?
Yeah. So I always like to start with the thing that I believe should ground all of our businesses. I mean, we go into business for ourselves as photographers, not because we want to be, billionaires or anything else. Like it really is. We love doing whatever version of photography we do. We want to serve the people we want to serve. And I feel like when we kind of tap back into that original dream business that we sort of built in our heads, but before we ever built the real business in the world, there is this kind of pie in the sky version of your preferences around your business. And that, it can include everything from the niche that you want to specialize in to the locations or location that you want to work in. Are you a studio photographer? Are you an in-home photographer? Do you do on-site work? Are you, if you're a wedding photographer, is it like fancy, high-end venue type things? Is it, I don't know, like in Australia, is it a big thing like it is here where people get married in barns?
Yes, it's definitely
Yeah.
a big thing.
So there's all these different versions of what being a photographer can mean. And somewhere, once upon a time, you had this vision of what your business would look like. And now maybe you're 6 months in, maybe you're 6 years in, whatever the case may be, chances are things have shifted. Now they can shift because your preferences shift, but oftentimes they also shift because of these perceptions that we have about like, well, this is what's hot right now, so I'm going to start serving that niche. Or people say they want their photos edited like this, so I'm going to do that. Whatever the thing is. Or if maybe you took a course with someone or there's a photographer who you really admire and you've started to sort of model your business after theirs. And it's not that that's wrong. It's just that you have to periodically check in and remember that number one thing that you need to be building your business around, even if it's not like 100% there just yet, is your vision. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if you are out of alignment with your vision, it's like the whole infrastructure, like the whole house of cards kind of falls apart if you're not doing or trying to do the thing that you love the most. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. I mean, I do a really, really simple exercise. Like, who do you want it? Like, what do you see yourself like in your ideal world going to do every day? And it's really funny. I actually recorded a podcast about this a couple of weeks ago. And I was just like, I went and did this mini shoot day and I got to go for lunch with my girlfriend afterwards. I dropped my daughter off at school. I picked her up. And when I did this exercise like 6, 7 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago, I'd say that was the exact day. Working with those people, going to have lunch with a girlfriend, getting to go and have a walk on the beach, do all of those things that I did in that day. And I just think that we can lose sight of that stuff so easily
Yeah,
when social media is telling you what you should have in your business. And you've got all these online people telling you should be doing, 6-figure businesses. And it's like, if you don't need that in your life, why would you be striving for it? But it's
absolutely.
so, I understand getting sucked into the vortex too, right?
Yeah.
Like, I totally get that. So let's move on because I know we could keep going for this for days. What's the next P? Because I'm so curious. I love this system. I love a good system. I love a good process.
Uh,
So
I know. And it is. It's helpful to have a framework, right? Especially when we're talking about something vague. So you've got your like pie in the sky version of your business based on your parameters. And then there's the reality, and I call that your based on your preferences. And then there's the reality, which I call your parameters, right? So let's say that I want to have a business where I photograph nothing but Hollywood, A-listers. I don't live in Hollywood. I don't live in LA. Like I live 5-hour flight away from LA. So that's going to be a really difficult thing to overcome at this age and stage of, my life, like where I am geographically in this case. But there's all kinds of different, versions of that. They're a little more true to reality. So let's say that you want to eventually have a studio and be a studio photographer, but currently you don't have the budget or the location for a studio. So, maybe you start working toward that by renting studio space or something like that. But we all have the realities of both our sort of our resources. So, and your resources can be everything from your equipment to, maybe you've got a best friend who works in SEO, so they're able to help you out with that, and another photographer doesn't have that resource.
Yeah.
So we've got the things that are working for us and toward our preferences and our ideal business. And then we've got the things that are kind of holding us back. The amount of time that we have to dedicate to our businesses, the amount of money that we have to invest in our businesses, the amount of money that we need to make in our businesses. All of those things kind of contribute to the parameters that, even though we want to be building toward our ideal business, we also have to take into account, like I was saying before, I don't want somebody to go into massive debt and then end up bankrupt because they tried to build this ideal business without sort of acknowledging the realities of their life at that phase. So you've got your preferences and you've got your parameters, and those are sort of the first two P's that you have to take stock of. And it's not just like a one-time thing. Again, both of those are changing over time. They're always evolving. So I encourage people at minimum to be checking in with those once a year, but oftentimes, especially in the beginning of your business, they're changing more rapidly. And so you want to kind of take stock of those things once a quarter, once every, 6 months, something like that.
I'm glad that you brought that up because instantly my mind kind of went to my gut feeling is that a lot of people live more in the parameters space rather than the preferences, in that they
Mhm.
see all the things that they can't do rather than, but I think there just needs to be that healthy balance between the two, right? So is there anything that you can suggest people to do to like, so you said like it's sort of a check-in. Is there sort of like a checklist or something that you have that people can sort of tap into this a little bit, like and get sort of more clarity on what the things are that they should be actually looking at?
Yeah, so I was going to give everybody a link to a
Do you want me to
little
come back to that
quiz.
at the end then? How about I
We'll
leave
come
that
back
to
to
the
it at
end?
the end, but
Yeah, cool.
I talk about this a lot, and there's so many different, every time I have a conversation with somebody about this, like different pieces of it come up. What I think is nice is that once you're kind of aware of it and once you start putting this language around it where you're saying, my preferences and my parameters, you'll find those things, yeah, in your own, just like as you're kind of musing about your business and what you want and what you need and what you have and what you don't have and all those kinds of things. I just think that having that framework kind of allows you to see it for what it is, which is just, it's a matter of like where you are in time right now. So
It's a
yeah,
data
and
set, right? And this is the thing
it
I think a
is.
lot of
Yeah.
creatives struggle with is that we live in our brains so much. And I think it's just important to put pen to paper sometimes so that you can actually see the reality of your situation, that it's not
Yeah.
as drastic or as you think it is. It's just like when you see it, you can't unsee it, right? That's the thing. It's
Yeah.
like, and also
Yeah.
too, it helps to put some logic, I think, and maybe get other people involved in it too, where they might be able to help you to get to some perspective on it. Would you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Yeah.
that especially if you've got like a good friend who really knows where your heart was when you started your business, or like has seen you on those days where you have that perfect day and you're just like, this is what I wanted my business to be like. Somebody who can kind of hold you accountable to actively working toward that and making decisions through that filter, I think is invaluable.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. Okay, let's move on to the next P because we're I know
Sure.
we're gonna
Yeah,
run
yeah,
short of
yeah. And
time.
we can kind of speed through. I was going to say after these first two, I've kind of added a sixth P in, which is to pause. And the reason that I say pause is that those two things, even though they are like their reality, they are shifting based on those two things. We need to then evaluate what kind of a business we're running, what our business model is going to be like. And I think photographers get very like blinders on about this, where they're like, I see this photographer running their business this way. That must be the only way to make a living. I often talk about when I first started, it was like you have to do high end everything in order to be profitable as a photographer. And later in my career, I looked around and I was like, there's a lot of businesses out there that make a lot of money working at a smaller scale, where each individual transaction is a lower transaction, but they build a business that allows them to do more volume. And it was kind of this like weird mind mind melting experience where I was like, oh, we could do that in photography too. And in fact, then I started to look around and see that there were some people out there doing it. So there were good models for that. And I don't think that there's a right or a wrong. I often talk about this. I have like nicknames for the three different business models that work. I call them the unicorn, the workhorse, and the donkey. And there's not a good one or a bad one. There's not a right one or a wrong one. It's just like what's right for you and what's right in your business. And I know that your business, like when you and I have talked about these personal brand mini sessions and these days where you create this sort of economy of time where you are doing multiple shoots in a single day and you're making an experience of it or whatever, I would actually call that more like this donkey model where you are making it available to people financially, time wise, whatever. It's helping them in that way. And it's helping you because
Mm.
you are not dedicating an entire day to a single client. You're able to do more in a single day. So, a lot of times when I use these names, people are like, oh, the donkey. I don't want to be the
I'm a
donkey. Or like, I want to be a
donkey.
unicorn. And I feel like the unicorn model can be amazing, but it is like its own particular, you have to want that. You have to want to spend tons and tons of time with each client and like put all the bells and whistles on everything. I personally fall sort of in the workhorse model, which is in the middle, which is great in a lot of ways, but it also requires that you kind of work a little harder to stand out from the crowd. Anyway, I digress, and I didn't mean to do that. But that is where your preferences and parameters really are the things that dictate what your model is. And the good news is, even as your preferences and parameters shift over time, you typically stay in that same, like your ideal business model is pretty stable over time. And once you've identified that ideal business model, that's when these other three P's come into play. So they are your product. So your offer, your other, multiple offers, anything that you sell in your store or in-person sales, like anything like that. So anything that you sell, those are your products. We are also our own product, right? So our
Mm.
personal brand is going to, is going to be reflected or should reflect our business model. If you are a super unicorn business and you are constantly posting on Instagram about like your financial troubles or you're like, oh, I'm so stressed, like that's not a unicorn experience
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
your clientele. So you want to put the right foot forward in that. And then your pricing is the next P there. So once you've got your products set up, your pricing needs to reflect your business model. So your markup is going to be a lot higher if you are on the more unicorn end of things. However, the time that you invest in each individual sale or each individual client is also going to be a lot higher and bigger. And then finally are your policies. Policies exist in every business, everywhere along that spectrum, but at the sort of like higher volume, lower price point per business model, then your policies are going to be more in favor of the business or your own business versus, your unicorn clients probably have your cell phone and are allowed to call you at 11 p.m. on a Friday night. Like it's just a different set of expectations that go into that. So when you have a business where at the top of it, you've built a business that works both for what fills you up and fills your cup and also works with your lifestyle and what you have available to you. And then everything else sort of lines up with that. That's a business that when someone lands on your website or calls to find out about your offers or is hearing about you from a friend, it all makes sense together. And it makes sense
Mm.
on sort of a visceral level where they're like, oh, okay, she's charging a whole bunch of money, but that makes sense because of X, Y, and Z, because I can see that lines up with everything else.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because I know that so many people that I work with, they have that incongruency inside of them because they feel like they have to bend and flex to fit in with the client. But what you're telling me here now is that this is really about building a business that works for you rather than you working for it, right? So you structure everything around it. It's this is to me what I see this as is a giant filter for a
Yeah.
decision making process, right?
Yeah.
It's
And
like,
that's honestly like so many other things in business. Sometimes it's just calling these things to our attention and
yep.
being aware of them, being sort of intentional about them that makes all the difference. It's not that you need to shift something dramatic in your business. Chances are most of the stuff is working really well. But once you've got kind of your eyes on this and you're looking at it a little bit more, you're investigating with this curiosity of like, okay, what isn't lining up? That's when you start to see like, if I could just shift this one thing, then everything's going to get, become more aligned and start to make more sense. Again,
I
for your clients, but also for you.
I absolutely love this framework because I think that as creatives, and I think you've come from nursing, so I assume that you've done the degree and you've probably got maybe a little bit more of a scientific process analysis brain than what maybe most
Probably.
photographers do.
Yeah,
Whereas I think it's very easy to just get caught up in the emotion of things and to not
sure.
to swirl in it. And I mean, I know I've been at definitely at stages in my business where it's been definitely out of a line now that I'm looking at this list and going, I was saying yes to everything because I was so worried about the next job not coming, or I was worried about not getting approval by other people. And I was so busy doing things for other people rather than forgetting why it is that I'm in business for myself. And I see so
Yeah.
many people get to this point where they get hit burnout or overwhelm, or even overwhelm in an underwhelm of jobs. Do you know, like you're sort
Yeah.
of sitting in the overwhelm of building this business and grasping at things. And as you say, adopting the practices of other business owners and just feeling like a failure for not being
Mhm.
able to get this right because they're piecing it together based on what they think it should be. I just love that
Right.
you've come to this place where it's like, what do you want and how do we make it fit for you?
Right. Absolutely. And so many businesses can be like, there's 1,000 different ways to create a successful business. We are shown kind of a specific, narrow view of that by an industry that wants to sell to you, or, we self select too, and we find photographers that we admire and we lose sight of what it is that we admire about them. Often, the thing that we admire most about them is the fact that they are being authentic to what they wanted to build in the first place, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And again, that's not something that is, we don't see it in like the stats. We don't see it on, anything. We get this sense of it. But the only way to let other people get that sense of you is to make sure that you are building a business around what lights you up and what your vision for the business was in the first place.
This makes my heart sing because this is what I spend so long with my students doing as well. And I love that you and I are very similar. Like this is, I keep saying, like, I can give you templates, but you need to make sure that it feels congruent and resonant with
Right.
what you want to do. So there's no cookie cutter approach. I'll help you and give you the guidance that you need, and I can give you some structure, but ultimately go and play on your own and
Yeah.
figure it out for yourself and just make it work for you. And I know that, like before, about like marketing and things like that. Is there a way that you believe that this can wrap now into a marketing aspect? Is there a way to bring this framework into a marketing mindset? And how do you think you can apply this to a marketing? Because I know that you and I both love to talk about this. So is there some way that you found that you can adapt this kind of parameters and now help people with their marketing with it?
Yeah, so I actually feel like the answer is yes, but it's almost a natural extension of having this aligned business, because once everything starts to kind of fit together, it just becomes a whole lot easier to own your business. Does that make sense? Like it
Yeah.
feels more like, oh, yeah, okay, this makes sense to me. So I'm going to talk about it in a way that sounds like I believe that it makes sense. And when your confidence level goes up around what it is that you're offering, when your excitement is high about what it is that you're offering, that's contagious in a way that, like, if I could bottle that up and sell it as a marketing technique, like confidence and excitement are 9/10 of the battle. It helps with the copy that you write. It helps with the message that comes across on your website. When you're speaking with someone, it just comes across as more like, yep, here's how all these things work. And I can't tell you how many times I've been on the phone with a potential client, a prospective client, who I give them my spiel, right? I talk about my options and my packages and my pricing, whatever. And at the end, I say, how does that all sound? Do you have any questions that I can answer? And it's like so many times they're like, oh no, this makes perfect sense. And I feel like when they say this makes perfect sense, you've answered all of my questions. That is because, in part, it's because I've had a lot of those conversations over the years. But part of it is because I 100% believe in my process, my pricing, all of those pieces. And I just feel like that comes across. And it gives someone, there's a fair amount of trust required. If I were the water bottle that somebody was tossing in their in their gym bag, they have to trust that I'm not going to go like soaking all of their clothes. And I feel like when it just feels right, even if my price point is higher than they were anticipating, or even if, now they're going to have to go back and have a conversation with their partner about like, okay, we're going to splurge on this thing that I really want, they feel more confident about it. And so I'm much more likely to get hired.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. That confidence and excitement is exactly what I find that I get to at the end of every sales call with my clients. If you've
Yeah.
gotten that far in the conversation, you pretty much know that they're sitting there on the hook. And I don't say that like it's just like if you've served them, if you've delivered them and you've matched what their needs are, that you've matched their needs and you've solved their problem by way of you confidently and excitedly talking about how you know that what you can offer them is the solution, then I just think it's just, and I know you said the word they're feeling. And to me, it's just all about that confidence in that feeling. Intuitively when you've met someone who you base your confidence in, right? And if you're
Yeah.
asking, like for me, sometimes I'm asking $3,000-4,000 up front for people to work
Sure.
with me. And for them to do that, it needs to be 100% congruent in their mind. I love that we've had this discussion today because I just think that, yeah, when we talked about alignment early on, I thought we were going to be talking about like the woo-woo sort of version of
Right.
it. That water bottle analogy is that perfect thing because, that is just a game changer, I think, for everybody that's listening today. So I'm so grateful to you for sharing with us today. Is
Oh
there
gosh.
anywhere that people can find out and learn more about you?
Yeah, sure. So my business is called This Can't Be That Hard. I have a podcast by the same name. That's my Instagram handle. That's my website. But I mentioned I do have this little quiz. It's like, I think it's 8 questions, but it has to do with, it asks you some questions about how you like to run your business, kind of tapping into your preferences. And based on that, it'll give you a whole rundown of like which business model might be your ideal business model. And you can kind of take it from there. I have you'll get your results without even having to enter your email address or anything. But if you do, then you get access to this little course that I have made about your business model and how you can sort of lean into how that business model works well. And so I just put that together at thiscan'tbethathard.com/Paula.
Great stuff. Oh, I'm going to go and find that. And
Oh yeah.
I'm determined to be the
Come take my
unicorn.
quiz. Oh my gosh, I know. Well, and it's funny because I often, when I'm talking about these business models, I do like my business runs as a workhorse, but I have often said if I were to start over, I would straight up start a donkey model business. I think I'm a big fan. So don't be afraid, no matter what your results are.
No, you know me, I'm all about batching my time and maximizing. So if that's the label that it needs to be on it, I'm totally
Yeah.
fine with that. I'll own it. I'm so aligned with my business. I'm good with
Yeah.
whatever label someone else wants to put on it. I'm
There you
happy. I'm
go.
living my life.
Perfect.
So
Yeah. Oh,
good stuff.
fun.
Well, thank you so much for sharing so beautifully with
Oh,
us
the
today.
pleasure was mine. This
I
was so much
appreciate
fun.
it.
Put on a tight show.
All right, take care.
You sure you
You
can
too.
dance?